TBS's Game 4 coverage from L.A. begins tonight at 7:30 Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific, as we welcome in the great Bob Costas. Bob, how would you answer that question?
You know, I thought that each of your compatriots had an excellent point, and I do believe, given the trend that we're now observing, that it is inevitable that there will be some sort of electronic balls and strikes within our lifetime, if I live another X number of years. But yet, as was pointed out, there is a rich tapestry to the game, Dan, and I appreciate all of those nuances, the little subtleties of a catcher framing a pitch to make a borderline ball appear to be a strike, a pitcher working the zone, figuring out what that particular plate umpire has as his strike zone that day. Can I go an inch further off either corner? And so, yes, while it is inevitable, it will be a blow to the game and to its connection to generational history. That's my answer, Dan, because that's what your guys want my answer to be.
But I wonder, though, Bob, we have the technology, but we want the umpires to get every other call right. But when it comes to the strike zone, we're sort of okay with it being loosely interpreted. Why?
Yeah, like yesterday, for example, it looked like Walker Buehler had Jock Peterson with strike three. The replay clearly showed the ball had the corner. It was an 0-2 pitch, would have been strike three. The at-bat continued. He got a base hit. It was part of a scoring inning for the Braves. You're right. We want everything down to the micromillimeter in every other call where replay is allowed. It's not allowed, by the way, on check swings, and we saw how that happened the last pitch of the game in Game 5 in the division series between the Giants and the Dodgers. I guess the resistance with balls and strikes is whether or not they really believe that an electronic strike zone is infallible. And there are some arguments about the depth of the strike zone and whether we can exactly get a guy's stance. What if the guy's stance changes? He goes into more of a crouch, whatever the case may be, the break of the pitch. Can technology perfectly capture that to where, okay, the plate umpire is 98% accurate, but can and I'm making that figure up, but let's say that's the figure, 98% accurate, and electronically, if we're only 99% accurate, is that worth it? And I'm not so sure that I'm as up as I should be on all the aspects of this to be able to say that they've gotten it to the point where an electronic balls and strikes approach will be infallible.
What was the mood?
If it's infallible, it's inevitable.
What was the mood like prior to Cody Bellinger's home run last night?
Dodger Stadium was about as quiet as 50,000 people can be. You heard murmurs rather than cheers. A few brave souls tried to get a "Let's Go Dodgers" chant going, and it went nowhere. When Will Smith and A.J. Pollock got hits and brought Bellinger to the plate, then the place came alive. And when he connected, it changed from a morgue into a madhouse, just like that.
And what is it about Bellinger? You know, like it used to be the Mendoza line was the embarrassing number at 200. He's batting 165 during the season, but seventh inning on in the postseason, he's become a different hitter. What has gotten into Bellinger?
Well, you know, he's had excellent regular seasons previously, and this season there was a combination of things, injuries, and then he couldn't get untracked. And now I guess he's just feeling it. What was really interesting, the home run yesterday that he hit off Luke Jackson, that pitch was up. And usually the book with Bellinger is if you're going to miss up, because he has that extreme uppercut swing, and he'll just lash a low pitch out of the park. And somehow he got on top of a pitch that probably was above the strike zone and hit it 400 feet.
What's the biggest storyline so far of the postseason?
Well, I think one of them would be if the Braves, who are still up, despite the fact that the momentum seems to have changed, the Braves are up 2-1. The biggest storyline could be that if we ever didn't realize it, we realize it now. This is a tournament, 162 games to get there, but already the team that won the most, 107, is out. Didn't even get to one step from the World Series. Out. close series with the Dodgers, but out. The Dodgers won 106. They could very well be out. The Braves, let's say, could make it to the World Series. 88 wins was the fewest for any division winner. And the Red Sox could very well, as a team that barely qualified as a wild card, the Red Sox could very well be their opponent. The old saying in sports, it's not so much who you play, it's when you play them. Yeah. It's a long season. The way pitching staffs are used now with openers and starters being applauded for giving you 4 solid innings, it's just a different game than it used to be, and more so than ever, especially with 2 wild cards, and maybe in the future there'll be more wild cards than that. The postseason is just a roll of the dice.
How do you think history is going to treat Jose Altuve?
The longer his career goes and the better he performs, it's a good question, but the longer his career goes, the better he performs, the further it is in the rearview mirror. I think on balance, it'll treat him kindly. Carlos Correa said recently that Jose was somebody who did not want to hear the banging on the trash can, that he did not benefit from that. But then there's the image of him coming around third after hitting that series-winning homer off Aroldis Chapman, and he appears to be clutching his jersey, and he's yelling at his teammates, "Don't rip my jersey off," and that led to speculation that there was some kind of wire on him. So if Carlos is correct, maybe Altuve was an innocent spectator who just didn't spill the beans because of the code of omerta. But if the thing about wearing a wire is true, and if we ever get a definitive answer to that, that could change the picture. But I think that generally speaking, people's memories outside of those who feel that they were directly burned by the Astros, Dodgers fans from 2017, whatever, I think most will be forgiving because he's a terrific player, and from all indications, he seems to be a very nice guy.
Yeah, but Shoeless Joe Jackson maintained he never took any money, and he hit 375. But
yep.
You know what? He's paid the price. Obviously barred from the Hall of Fame, never going to get in.
Yeah, he was actually, people don't realize this, he was actually on the ballot. In the early days of the Hall of Fame, he was on the ballot, never got enough support. He died in 1950. He was still technically eligible for veterans committees until in 1991, 2 years after Pete Rose was banned by Bart Giamatti. The Board of Directors of the Hall of Fame put in a rule that said anybody who's on the permanently ineligible list is not eligible for the ballot. And that was obviously aimed directly at Pete Rose, since at that point Joe Jackson had been dead for more than 40 years. And here's just an aside. I'm not a moralist on this. I don't know if I've talked with you about this before, Dan, but my dad was an inveterate gambler of the Guys and Dolls Damon Runyon school. He bet with guys named Blinky and Three Finger, who undoubtedly were connected to the mob. And this is in the 1960s. And very often the mortgage rode on whether he would win his bets or lose his bets. So I'm not being a moralist about this. But within the last decade, every commissioner of baseball has testified before Congress that legalized gambling would be the end of sports as we know it. It would be the worst thing that could ever happen. And now there's so much money available, they can't turn their backs on it. And not only do they embrace it, they promote it. And yet Pete Rose, who's in his 80s and who you wouldn't want to defend in every respect as a person, I'm not going to defend everything he did in baseball or outside baseball, he never did anything, so far as the evidence we have, never did anything that undermined the integrity of the competition as much as those who are still in the game and have been suspended but have returned, those who were on the Hall of Fame ballot, whether they get elected or not. Here he is on the outside looking in. How can this be made any more absurd? What would the harm be if Pete Rose went on the Hall of Fame ballot or was eligible before a Veterans Committee, and if he's on the ballot, the clock should start from zero? He was never on the clock, so you should get 10 years on that ballot if you want to do it that way, or make him, given his age, immediately eligible for Veterans Committee considerations. And if people want to hold the gambling against him in light of all the present realities and in light of all the comparisons to other people within baseball and their misdeeds, let them do it, but at least let him be considered.
Well, I just wonder, and I've talked to the previous commissioner about this, of further evidence did Pete bet when he was playing, which I believe he was betting when he was playing, and we know that he bet when he was managing. And he said, well, and years ago he told me and Keith Olbermann, I bet on my team to win. Well, you can manipulate the lineup to help you win. And can you separate Pete as the manager betting on baseball with just Pete as the player, and maybe we don't have as much evidence there that, like, could I put him in the Hall of Fame because he was a Hall of Fame player and, punish him by keeping him out of baseball because of what he did as a manager? Is it fair to split him up like that?
Well, in the big picture, I think you can temper justice with mercy. People who've committed heinous crimes, and I realize there's an apples and oranges aspect here, but people who have committed heinous crimes get paroled in less time than this. And we know that if Pete Rose lives to be 100, in the first paragraph of his obituary will be the fact that he bet on baseball and was banned from baseball because of it. The price that he has paid in his life and in his legacy is enormous. So, you could take that into account, I would think. By the way, I asked Rob Manfred that question about 5 years ago. Is there anything that baseball has on Pete Rose that the public does not know about? You don't even have to specify it. But is there something beyond the public understanding that leads baseball to say, no, this is a non-starter? And his answer to that was no.
Yeah.
Our reasons are out there. We know what our reasons are.
If I gave you one vote, Pete Rose, Roger Clemens, Barry Bonds.
Dan, you ask such good questions. I've said this before, and I said it to you. Some people, with regard to Barry Bonds, let's say, Tom Verducci is one. I have great respect for Tom. He says, I don't care if you took steroids the last year of your career and you already had a record number of home runs. If you ever did it once, that's it as far as I'm concerned. My position is a little bit more lenient than that. When you talk about Clemens and especially Bonds, you're talking about people who are on the short list of the greatest of the great. If you shrunk the Hall of Fame by 80 or 90% on their performing merits, they'd still be in the Hall of Fame. So, I could see voting for all of those guys, especially because of the price they have paid to their reputations, the amount of time that they have waited. I'd probably actually go Rose, Bonds, Clemens in that order.
Rose, Bonds, Clemens?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
But with ambivalence.
Yeah.
With ambivalence. In the case of Bonds, it's a terrible shame. Barry Bonds is a very intelligent guy, and his baseball IQ is at an Einstein level. And on his natural merits, he'd be in the discussion of the dozen or so greatest all-around non-pitchers who ever played. And think how much better his legacy would be outside San Francisco, where they love him seemingly unconditionally. But think how much better his legacy would be if he had hit 575 career home runs, hit 295 lifetime, won all the Gold Gloves, had all the great seasons. He'd be in the Hall of Fame, and he'd be close to universally respected and admired. And when Barry Bonds wants to sit with someone and talk with them, he's so engaging. He has that beautiful smile. People who know him well talk about his charitable acts and how engaging he can be. But he did play a good portion of his career with a chip on his shoulder because of the mistreatment that his dad had received and because of some of what he saw Willie Mays go through earlier in his career, although now Willie is beloved by everyone. So there was a chip on his shoulder, and a lot of that was projected to the media. But so what? Had he never used steroids, had he never turned baseball into a video game and distorted the competition, all of that would have been a mere footnote, and he'd now be at the top of the Hall of Fame pyramid. It's a shame.
I remember asking him about all of this information that, he is, his baseball IQ. And I said, do you share this information with your teammates? And he goes, no, because one day they could be my opponent, not my teammate.
Oh God!
Like, wow. Okay. All right. Yeah. Well.
Wow. Yeah, because tonight we're teammates.
Yeah, but tomorrow we might not
would you
be.
not share it during the World Series?
Yeah.
Trying to win the World Series.
Well, have fun tonight, Bob. It's great to talk to you, and thanks for joining us as always.
Thank you, Dan. Take care.
That's
Bye.
Bob Costas. He'll be joined by Pedro Martinez, Jimmy Rollins, Curtis Granderson.